Welcome back to BAI's Engineering Knowledge Series, the place where we go behind the scenes and speak to the specialists that make everything in broadcast transmission happen and gaining insights from them on the roles they play to keep the broadcast services to air 24/7, 365 days a year. My name is Masoud Rasouli, I'm Head of National Broadcasters at BAI Australia, and this is episode 4. Last time we got together, I asked you to picture what sits inside the building at the base of the tower. BAI's Jeff Dale and Matt Betts talked us through transmitters, PI, and the functions that support that equipment in the network. Now I want you to take a step back and picture everything we've spoken about so far. Now think about how all those separate parts are managed as a whole. How is all that complexity managed? And who manages it? Today we have Chris Howe, Network Planning Manager at BAI Australia, to complete the picture for us. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Maz. It's great to be here with you.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Chris. So, Chris, can we start by hearing from you a little bit about what you do at BAI?
Sure. My role as Network Planning Manager requires me to understand all of the assets that we use for broadcasting for our customers and bring together a plan for investment in those assets that ensures that we're continuing to keep an upgraded network that's reliable and safe for ongoing operation.
Sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a fair bit in it. We bring a lot of inputs in. We bring in data from condition data, and we bring in performance data, and we look for opportunities to invest in efficient and effective ways, thinking about our customers' requirements, and putting together plans that allow us to stay ahead of both technological changes and also the condition of the network as things change over time.
Yeah, sounds very holistic. I like that. So, Chris, can you tell us what is asset management at BAI and how does it keep our network running?
Well, asset management at its core it's the fusion of maintenance and inspection practices with timely investment to make sure that you're operating your network in as safe and as reliable a mode as you possibly can. It's a junction between those two. So sometimes you'll find you're maintaining and inspecting a little more. Sometimes you'll find that you'll invest in newer equipment because that's a better use of your energies.
Right. And so what do you consider with all of this? Like when you are looking at the network and you're looking at the assets, what are all the factors that contribute to you making a decision on whether you'll replace it or you'll fix it or leave it alone?
Well, we're looking at a number of factors. So there's performance. Obviously, we monitor our performance very closely, and we've got a lot of data that comes back to us to tell us how a particular asset is performing. We also take into account maintenance and inspection information, and it kind of depends on the asset. In terms of a mechanical asset like a structure, you might find that inspections and maintenance will give you more information than performance because there's little performance data that you can get out of a structure, although we are starting to look at how they perform from getting that data back. But when it comes to electronic equipment, sometimes that can appear to be okay, but not be performing very well. So you sort of take a bit of a different view on it depending on what the asset is. And then there's also other questions around supportability. If a piece of equipment becomes obsolete or a manufacturer stops supporting it, we look at our spares holding and we try and understand how supportable for us that particular asset is. And those things go into our decision-making matrix.
Yeah. Well, in our last session when we spoke to Jeff and Matt, the whole philosophy around spares management and making sure that we've got enough there to support the 1,500 or so transmitters we have, probably even more in this network, and we can continue to support them. So it sounds like it's a really important thing to consider when we are looking after a network the size of ours.
Yeah, and you have to do it through data because you can't know this network. It's very hard to know this network off the back of your hand. I've got 20 years experience with this network, so I know it quite. I know it quite well. And of course there are parts of it that I grew up on. That I learnt the trade on when I was a technician. So,
Mm,
I'm quite intimate with quite a number of our sites, but there are other sites where, that intimacy is just not there because I've not spent a lot of time with those at those sites. So you have to rely on data and you have to rely on the
yeah.
information coming back.
So you've mentioned data a little bit now, Chris. So how are you supported in your role? Obviously, looking at a network holistically and thinking about things like the age, condition, performance, maintenance, and the like. What are the functions that feed into planning and implementation of asset management?
I'd like to tell you that, I'm the all-seeing, all-knowing oracle of the network, but
Would
that's
would believe you if you said that.
that is absolutely not true. I have a lot of support around me. I have people on what I sort of see the work that I do as inputs and outputs. On the input side, to me, I have a lot of we have a number of data analysts that are giving me that data. We also have our subject matter expert group who can advise me when they've seen things or heard things about, what's going on. Like we talk about supportability. We've got our spares management team, and of course our SIU team, which are a very valuable source of information coming back to us. So all of those things feed me on the input side. But then on the output side, I have a huge support network there as well to deliver the programs that we put in place. So project management teams that manage our projects effectively, plus the engineering teams that do all of our design, and and a procurement team that makes sure any equipment that we're procuring, we're getting, we're doing well in our procurement. So it's a very large team.
Sounds it, absolutely. Getting all those pieces to come together and you know, create the machine that is asset management.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So, Chris, can you tell us a bit about risk and how it drives reinvestment?
Risk is pretty much driven by data. I've spoken about data a lot, but the data that we get back helps us understand the risk that we face in any particular asset group. So risks can come in different forms. They could be safety risks to our people or the community. They could also be risks to our customers in terms of the continuity of service. So we like to avoid major continuity of service risks there. And we also have financial and operational risks to our business. We can't have situations where, a lack of investment or the wrong choice creates a big financial penalty or a big operational penalty for us. So, there's multiple different risks that we look at. And but yes, very much driven by the data that we get back. Quite a complex mosaic because yes, you have service, and our customers are most interested in the service, a particular service or a particular network. That's what our customers are interested in. But that service could be driven from any particular asset. Any particular asset could have an impact on that service, and that understanding between the asset risk versus the service risk is key.
Absolutely not. No, service continuity is number one. Well, safety is number one, then service continuity.
They're right beside each other in my mind.
Yeah, yeah. So, Chris, how do you assign risk?
It's through a risk matrix. So we've got I think most businesses today operate a risk matrix, talking about the likelihood of something occurring versus the severity if it does occur, that sort of thing. And then we assign risk, and that sort of helps us identify where we have high and extreme risks. We don't necessarily just accept a risk. If something's a moderate risk versus a high or an extreme risk, it's not so much a case of accepting that risk, but it does help us to prioritize, and that's where the important part of this comes in. Extreme risks get prioritized quite highly. The more moderate risks certainly get programmed into the plan, and we look for opportunities to take care of those risks with other things. So there's an efficiency there that we try and build.
So you've mentioned a couple of different risk severities. What's temporal risk? I've heard you speak about that before.
Temporal risk is that risk that you take by not doing something today. So if you've got a very large network of 1,000 assets, whatever those assets are, if you choose to, and those assets say have a 10-year lifespan, it's very easy maths to say, well, you should be replacing 100 of those assets every year. But if you choose to only replace 50 assets this year, you've basically pushed 50 of those assets into next year. And if you choose to only do 50 again next year, what you're doing is building up this bow wave of risk that will come back to hurt you in time to come. And it's a time-based risk, hence temporal risk.
Presumably different assets have a different temporal risk tied to them, like something like a structure might be different to something like a piece of pie,
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Yep. And the degradation of those different assets changes over time as well. If you build a new tower today and you do nothing to it for the next 5 years, the likelihood is that it's still going to be in reasonably good condition in 5 years' time. But if it's already if it's gone through a number of years of its life, and you get to within say 5 to 10 years of the end of its life, the degradation accelerates quite dramatically towards the end of life as things like corrosion take on. So yeah, you can't push that risk down the road too much further once you get to that point.
It sounds like we've covered just the basics, and asset management sounds like a very complex thing that you and the teams do. Could you share with us a few examples of where you've gone through the process of identifying the risk, taking on the data, and then coming up with a plan of implementation to address the risk, and what's the outcome been?
Yeah, we've had a number of historical programs and a couple that are in play right now. So back in quite a while ago, about 10 years ago, we identified that the energy demand of our network required us to start reducing that energy demand if we could do so. And we conducted a digital television replacement program. All of the transmitters were replaced across the country. We did that basically for major energy efficiency. There was a step change in the technology at the time, and allowed us to replace with brand new technology that allowed us to save significant amounts of energy without impacting the delivery of service or anything like that. So that program was completed in around 2017, 2018. So we looked at the data, the energy that we were using, and did some comparisons to what we thought we would use. Looked at what the program would consist of, and conducted that replacement. So that was a good example. Similarly, the FM replacement program that only just completed in the last year or two. We were looking at those from a safety point of view. So we assessed the risk. The older transmitters had a need to be heavily serviced manually on an annual basis. So there was quite an impact to our customers, as well as night work that was placing our staff at risk. So we decided to replace those transmitters to mitigate that risk. And so we've replaced them all across the country now, and that program is drawn to a close. And then more recently, we started doing some performance analysis of particularly our A and B class network. And we could see that our program input equipment was, by and large, causing us the greatest level of pain, or causing our customers the greatest level of pain. So we've created a new standard for our program input equipment, and we're now rolling that out across the country as we speak. I think there's a few being installed in A-class sites this week.
The replacement of all this equipment happening, and modern technology coming through, and I guess succeeding the older stuff that was in place. Presumably, we're getting a lot more smarts from these like devices than we were before. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Mas. The newer generation of equipment is IP connected. It certainly brings a lot of benefits to us to be able to centrally diagnose and monitor the equipment. Older generation of equipment certainly was connected back to our service management center, but it was little more than the transmitter or the piece of equipment putting its hand up and saying, hey, right, something's wrong. Now we're able to not only tell that something's wrong, but actually diagnose the transmitter remotely, which makes it a far more efficient process when we're sending our field technicians out to these things, because they know what's wrong with the transmitter before they get there, and they're likely to be able to take the right parts and all of those sorts of things. So it's a vast improvement on what we've had in the past.
Sounds like it's really helped with service continuity far more than what we were able to in the past.
Yeah, we've also installed a lot of N+1 functionality, so standby transmitters. And what that means is that if something does go wrong, we've got a lot of connectivity to be able to put something else to air. So making these sites more resilient, greater redundancy across these sites,
Yeah.
and we can recover remotely more quickly than we ever could before. So it's giving us a huge benefit in that connectivity space.
If you would have to put your hand up and say, this one program or this one piece of activity that we've done is my proudest one that I've been involved in, what would that be?
That's a hard one. I'm quite proud of the performance improvement that we got from the FM transmitter replacement. When we look at the benefits that we've received in terms of performance, the charts basically just dropped to nothing. We had a few little issues creeping into the network with the older equipment, and that performance has just improved out of sight. So I'm really quite proud of that performance improvement. And I'm also quite proud of the way we delivered that. There was some challenges associated with that through the COVID pandemic.
We hear the term asset management a lot, but to hear what it actually means for an organization like ours that owns and operates infrastructure that provides broadcast services is very insightful. Things don't just happen on their own. They're driven, and they're done in a way that ensures services run for the longest time. Chris, thank you.
My pleasure, Maz. It's been great to be with you.
BAI's Chris Howe telling us about the very important role he plays in keeping broadcast services to air 24/7, 365 days a year. No asset management, no services to air. For more info on what Chris spoke about today, please click on the link provided with this podcast on the webpage. If you have any questions on today's session, please get in touch with either myself or Chris. Thanks for watching.